appreciated, but this is a romantic notion. It was simply trodden underfoot. Colour blazed across the landscape. But the only colours to interest the miners are those to be found underground. For our hero, chipping away down there in his hole, it was only the rust red of iron, the white ores of silver and gold, and the iridescent blues and greens of copper that interested him. The town called Ruby began as a single shack under the distinctive Montana Peak. Life for the early inhabitants, particularly the women folk of Ruby, was undoubtedly hard. All the water had to be carried from a sulphurous stream, and wherever you turned, animals, large and small, were to be found, resenting this intrusion. More than a dozen species of snake lived in the valley. Many of them were poisonous, and virtually all of them could swim. Now almost treeless, the trees were underground holding up the mines, the valley was then invaded by cowboys and their cattle. Between 1870 and 1891, the cattle population of Arizona rose from 5,000 to 1.5 million, and their impact on the countryside was devastating. The cattle were everywhere, and as they stripped off the grass, only wildlife able to subsist on very little water did well, for the overgrazing produced raw desert in some areas. Desertification fortunately never quite overtook Ruby. Its wildlife actually became more varied. The town grew steadily and acquired a name when it was established enough to merit a post office. The deliveries were operated from the store, and they chose the storekeeper's maiden name, Ruby, for the growing town. In its heyday, the school employed 3 teachers. The old records show that at least an effort was made to teach the children something of the wonders of their surroundings. Botany lessons. These sons and daughters of pioneer America were in fact living on the edge of a truly remarkable desert. Some 250 species of birds, more than in any other arid region on the continent, make their homes in the Sonoran Desert. But it's unlikely that the teacher's pearls of wisdom fell into anything but a cultural desert. The ocotillo plant was of particular interest to the class because it could be grown as a fence to keep animals out, not as a perch for hooded orioles. As a general rule, everything that moved around Ruby was shot. In the early days, the Ruby store never sold meat. Free venison was too plentiful. The bounty on mountain lion was worth more than a week's wages to a miner. Anything which might kill stock was hunted out. Our present attitudes to conservation were totally alien to working people half a century ago. They saw themselves in direct conflict with the wildlife. Admittedly, some of the creatures did fight back. And human reactions to some of the animals was understandable. At the end of summer, lots of huge, hairy tarantula spiders go walkabout in search of mates. The size of mice, they can easily climb walls. And as the heat mounts in the middle of the day, they very sensibly head for the nearest shady place. Tarantulas were among the least poisonous creatures around Ruby. But as one old record confirms, tarantulas can make a baby very sick. A baby's bonnet will shade a tarantula as well as baby. Then there were the clever little black widow spiders. They discovered the cool, shady privies, neatly fitted with toilet seats, frames tailor-made for black widow spider webs. Black widow spiders manufacture a venom which can cause lethal muscle cramps. They took a heavy toll amongst miners and their families, but for obvious reasons, the men and boys were at the greatest risk. An extremely common insect in Ruby was the 8-inch blue and orange centipede with very toxic mandibles. It was an absolute rule of thumb that you shook out your boots as protection against this most creepy of crawlers. And it wasn't that much safer underground. As we've said, one of the wonders of the Sonoran ecosystem and its surrounding hills is a range of beautifully coloured rattlesnakes. And as the day's heat grew, they would make their way underground. The hill was by now a maze of tunnels, and some of these snakes became trapped down here, frightened and ever more hungry. The new workings were quickly discovered by cave-dwelling bats, and the bats in their turn had been discovered, very thankfully one suspects, by the lost snakes. Other unhappy wanderers, including America's only poisonous lizard, the Gila monster, were also kept alive by an ever-increasing supply of young bats falling from the thriving colony in the roof. Making their way gingerly through ill-lit passages, these shafts were first worked by candlelight, they attracted a particularly obnoxious insect known as the kissing bug, which drew blood and could cause vicious irritation and irreversible nerve damage. But the rattlesnakes, their poison sacs often fully primed, were the main danger. They have heat-sensing mechanisms which can operate in total darkness. To the pioneering miners, it must have seemed that only monsters inhabited the abyss, and they showed none of them any mercy. A labyrinth of 8 miles of tunnels was eventually drilled into the hill. The sheer noise of winches, generators, pumps, stamp mills and crushers reduced the natural peace of the valley to a hellish bedlam, which would keep the animals at bay for the next 30 years. Montana Peak now overlooked a wasteland, 600,000 tons of true, if man-made, desert, tailings of sand spat out by the thundering crushers, the dead heart of the hill. In 3 decades, man had reduced the verdant valley to a Martian landscape. Every year that went by added to this nightmare tip, bullet-scarred monuments telling of man's indifference to nature. The violence of the place and the horrors of life for man and beast were epitomized by the fate of the storekeeper, always at the center of life in Ruby. A spate of minor robberies had finally culminated in her brutal murder by bandits from Mexico. One of them, Martinez, was caught and hanged after his victim's gold teeth were offered for sale in a nearby bar. Finally, in 1940, the rape of the valley was complete. The mine shafts flooded, making it inoperable. The miners downed tools, closed the doors of the town for the last time, and left Ruby to its many ghosts. So ended Act 1 of this Western drama. But the elements, the all-powerful elements of nature, took over the action. Three unusual features remained, which made Ruby much more attractive to the wildlife than the surrounding countryside. There was the man-made desert, the lake created by damming the stream, and finally, all the buildings. The store and the sturdy jail next to it. The school, the doctor's house, and all the more substantial buildings stood waiting for the return of the refugees. Just as in human society, structures with the best roofs, like the school, attracted the first inhabitants. The safest home sites are high off the floor. Here, Polyste's wasps have built their tubular nests in a vacant corner. The wasps masticate and mould a meat pâté for their young from captured caterpillars. The grubs impress their hunger on the parent wasps by rotating their heads and scratching on the side of their nests. Sadly for the wasps, their nest has been invaded by a parasitic fly. The fly maggots have now hatched and have started to work their way through from the back of the nest, where they'll feed on the wiggling grubs, while the wasps are still servicing the front ends. Tarantulas, during this period of lusty nomadism, do not need regular homes. Nor do creatures like the big centipedes. But grasshopper mice do like their creature comforts, and sometimes they share them with other venomous creatures. Grasshopper mice often take on tarantulas, although discretion got the better part of valour when it came to this huge male. The centipede has already found his breakfast. At 8 inches, he's considerably bigger than the grasshopper mouse, and his front jaws are venomous. It's also hard to know which end you're fighting. It's thought that the centipede may also be using some sort of repugnant spray or strong scent, which could account for the way the mouse keeps closing its eyes. But this is obviously a battle that grasshopper mice have fought and won before, because when finally the centipede is vanquished, the biting mandibles are chosen by the mouse as the delicacy. The children of Ruby would have eaten the sweet prickly pears from this cactus outside their school. Today it's the home of the lynx spider. Prickly pear cactuses flower for only a fortnight a year, and each flower is open for only a few hours. So the creatures dependent upon them, like these bees and the lynx spider, enjoy a short and sweet relationship. The spiders sit right on the edges of the flower, their only subterfuge being their yellow and green colouring. The bees, fighting against time, engage in a frenzy of pollen collecting. Enmeshed in these golden cups, the bees are easy prey for lynx spiders. A few months later, the cactus flowers have died, and the fruits ripened. With no one to pick them, they provide a nest for baby lynx spiders in their hundreds. By the middle of the day, all the rattlesnakes have started to look for somewhere shady. Their live bodies allow them easy access to every nook and cranny, so other creatures have learned to build high. These black phoebes have taken over a swallow's nest. This blacktail knows that if he times it right, there might be a meal from upstairs. The swallows are obliged to build themselves another nest. The snake decides that these tough homes of mud and straw, exactly the same as the adobe used to build Ruby, are impregnable, inaccessible, and not worth the trouble. Ruby crawls with prey for snakes. It's easier to move on. Lizards of all shapes, sizes and colours use the flat faces of the Ruby buildings like solar panels. Many have learned to use the buildings in crafty ways. Tree lizards employ the window screens once built to keep insects out as a metallic web in their hunt for bluebottles. Ruby lizards seem to apply the fight rules of Western sheriffs to their encounters. They wait for the fly to make the first move. Just as fast on the draw but also cool and calm, and as tough as the oldest boots is the horned toad, which is in fact a lizard. Horned toads eat ants, and how many they eat depends on how tough they are and how cool they can play it. Ants swarm over the toads, and when they discover the toads are not rocks, they bite viciously. Cool Hand Luke Toad waits until the maximum number of ants are in range, and then he draws them in. By the middle of the day, the heat is so intense in Ruby, earless lizards can scarcely bear to touch the ground, and do press-ups to relieve their tummies on the superheated surfaces. These lizards eat insects, including stick insects twice their size. But you have to be careful about sticks around this town. The vine snake poses as a branch in the tree outside the old teacher's house, and his favourite food is lizards. Each swift move down on the prey is punctuated by a brief pause of perfect stillness. Only one lizard in these parts has no fear of vine snakes. He's too big, too venomous, a genuine monster, or at least so called, the Gila monster. This one is heading for the easy pickings around the richest wildlife habitat in Ruby, the lake. A well-established lake in these desert surroundings is a rarity beyond price. Insects multiply over the lake in blizzard proportions. They provide masses of food for several species of fish. Bluegills are dominant and very aggressive, but they display like fan dancers. The most unexpected visitor here, bearing in mind that we're in the middle of a desert, is that king of fishing raptors, the osprey. despite the acrobatics, it's the insects that have the last laugh, or rather the last bite. From the lake, the stream runs on into a desert of rock and rubble, where at the height of the summer it often dries out, trapping the fish. Their remains are tidied up by tiger beetles. The Gila monster is on his way to a more traditional breakfast. Gila monsters are especially fond of eggs, and an American plover known as a killdeer has chosen this oven-like rockery to lay her clutch. It's so hot, the plovers spend the whole day damping down the eggs. The birds must regularly change places on the nest so that the partner may visit the lake, wet its feathers, and return to the nest where it scatters the water onto the eggs. It's impossible to raise a family in this part of Ruby without this form of air conditioning. Except if you're a Gila monster. The plover tries everything it knows to divert the monster, even the old broken wing trick. In reality, Gila monsters are probably the most misunderstood and misnamed creatures in the West. There was even a belief among the pioneers that the monster's very breath was poisonous. In fact, their bite is very painful, but rarely lethal. The killdeer have laid enough eggs to keep ahead of the predators, and a few months later they're rewarded with a healthy, adequate brood of chicks. There is at first glance one totally uninhabitable man-made habitat in the Ruby Valley that may never go away: the tailings of finely crushed ore. But if you watch very closely, life is even popping up here. Huge cicada killer wasps mate competitively. The mated female then surveys the tailings for a site for her brood chamber. The packed sand makes perfect nurseries for wasps, who are extraordinary diggers. Then, because their artificial desert is especially featureless, they fly round the hole to fix its exact location. This orientation is vital, because the wasp then takes off on flights which can cover many miles. Also working the tailings for insects are fast-flying Say's phoebes. They've turned the desert to good use by building nests under the overhanging lips of the sand wall. These are the only nest sites safe from rattlesnakes. Above the tailings, the phoebes engage in aerial warfare with the cicada killer wasps. By crashing into them in mid-flight, they hope to dislodge and steal the juicy cicadas that the wasps have captured. The strategy sometimes works, but there are many wasps and many cicadas, and like helicopters carrying home the victims of a desert war, all the wasps eventually return to their home burrow with their prized cargo. In the brood burrow, the female lays an egg on the live cicadas, which have only been paralyzed by the wasp's poison. It remains almost fresh food. For a short period of each year, all this activity is closed down by a dramatic change of weather. Every summer, monsoon-like storms sweep the valley. Returning Ruby to nature is a task shared between these most elemental forces and the myriad wildlife, with the elements far and away the more powerful of the partners. And when the storms have passed and the clouds blow away to be replaced by Arizona's traditional heat-baked skies, naked walls inevitably dry out, contract, crumble, and finally collapse. For the larger animals that once enjoyed this pristine countryside, the violence of the natural demolition means the town is still viewed with nervousness and a degree of suspicion. Have the people really gone? Or does the world's most destructive predator still lurk behind these walls? Mammals, large and small, are now assembled in a nervous ring around the town. Javelina are browsing ever closer to the abandoned town, relaxed enough even to mate. The more aggressive predators like coyotes and grey foxes are leading the return. But ironically, by the time all these have plucked up the courage to come back into town, it could well have vanished before their very eyes, because all of Ruby is now being recycled. To all but the educated eye, this is a bee going about its business in the poppy the teacher planted outside her window. In fact, it's a carpenter bee, and it's as much interested in her window as in the poppy. Hundreds of carpenter bees are invading the remaining wooden structures of Ruby as brood chambers for their young. They bore neat holes in the wooden frames and then excavate inside until the frames are all but hollow. The lower frame is being taken care of by another race of recyclers, termites. Everywhere you look, it's ashes to ashes and dust to dust. In the old store, vegetarian harvester ants are collecting seed pods. These they carry in their thousands to their nest out in the forecourt. Harvester ants do particularly well in the drier corners of Ruby because their harvesting is well planned to keep them supplied with a good store of moist food year-round. The seeds and other matter are processed into food for the young, who are carefully attended and cleaned by nursing ants. But the business of maintaining and expanding the nest has also caused harvester ants to become involved in the recycling of ruby. They've started to encounter and to remove chips of green copper ore left over from the mining days. They treat them as junk. But here's final proof that this really once was the old Wild West. The ants have discovered a spent cartridge in the floor of the store, ejected by murderous Martinez perhaps as he fled, and now rejected by the ants. But all this daytime activity is as nothing in comparison with what goes on at night. Released from the soporific heat of day, wolf spiders begin their nightly rounds. They compete for food with arguably the most repulsive creature here, a wind scorpion, which has spider-like ways and unattractive table manners. The rattlesnakes are all waking up, and everywhere things are going bump in the night. Responsible for a very large part of these night noises are the most efficient recyclers of them all, pack rats. Pack rats will attempt to eat anything. Linoleum, cardboard and paper, old leather, metal, even paint. Ruby is now crawling with pack rats. Fortunately, it's crawling with other things who help to keep the balance. Pack rats are hunters too, and easily diverted by the night's flying snacks. But this time, when the pack rat returns from its foray, it's attracted its own predator, a ring-tailed cat. The fact that rats can seemingly go anywhere keeps it for a time ahead of the ringtail, which is actually a relative of the raccoon. And even when battle is finally joined, the ringtail finds he's dealing with an object as elastic as a bouncing ball. There are so many pack rats, the tribe can easily stand the limited amount of hunting they experience. Moreover, they build complicated middens in which the young are raised, packed with thorns, which are normally proof against all predators. The exception to this rule is snakes. Pack rat and snake sense each other at the same instant. but the midden is so convoluted the rat escapes. The ring-tailed cat has also been diverted by the prospect of an even richer source of food outside. These winged creatures are actually Ruby's most important inhabitants. In the dangerous labyrinth of tunnels honeycombing the hill, the tiny bat settlement has grown to a colony of thousands. 2 of the colonies have highly threatened species, and the useless mine workings have thus become a protected habitat under United States law. The bats leave these artificial caves as the moon rises and take over the job of skimming the lake of its nighttime insects. There's so much food to be gathered, Ruby bats have to take a digestion break halfway through the evening. For this, they've taken over the jail. Rather than going back into the mine, they use this as a halfway house, a kind of truck stop, to digest their suppers. The byproducts of all this digesting and eating fall to the floor, where yet another cycle of eating is going on. In fact, there's a third cycle. The bats have lots of parasites. Males offer belligerent displays to warn rivals off their females. The jail is also warmer than the mine, so the bats wait here until just before dawn, make a second feeding foray, and then, as the sun rises, make their way back down the mine. And it could well be that these bats, safe in their eerie cavern, will keep the name of Ruby alive forever. Local conservationists, including the present owners of Ruby, hope now to turn the valley into a mountain desert wildlife sanctuary. The old buildings are all but gone. The lake in particular is a vision of extraordinary beauty. But if you still find the idea of ghost towns a little sad, pause and consider what the Ruby Valley would have looked like had the mine been a bigger success. Ruby is surrounded by successful mines, and they all look like this. Perhaps Ruby wasn't such a failure after all.